Hello, my friends. I just wanted to drop some special bonus episodes into the feed that you probably have not heard unless you are a part or an early part of the Patreon for the Life Shift podcast. If you don't know, I do have a Patreon. It currently only has two tiers. One is a $3 a month tier just to support what I'm doing, helps cover production costs. And then there's a $5 tier, which will get you episodes early and just the, I guess, warm fuzzies for helping me out with the Life Shift podcast. But I used to have other tiers where people were so generous and were offering additional money each month to get bonus episodes and possible winnings of t-shirts and all sorts of things. And then I realized a couple months ago that I wasn't able to deliver what I wanted to, especially for those of you that were giving me the extra money. So right now we're just kind of doing the early episodes. You'll always get those. So if you want to support the Life Shift podcast, please jump over to patreon.com/the Life Shift podcast, and you can find that information there. But I come on here because I want to share a series of these bonus episodes that I did early on in the Patreon journey. There are like 20 plus episodes in which I had bonus recordings with previous guests. So I would go back and we would have a conversation about the experience of sharing their story on the Life Shift podcast, catch up on anything. And I think these are super important. And I know most of them did not see the light of day from outside of the Patreon. So I'm going to be dropping these episodes. Whatever you're listening to now is another episode. So I'm going to use the same intro for all of them. But here is one of the bonus episodes with a former guest from the Life Shift podcast. And if you like this, let me know because I'm thinking of bringing some of this back and talking to previous guests as I go into year 4. So enjoy this bonus episode that was once released on the Patreon feed. I'm Matt Gilhooly, and this is The Life Shift, candid conversations about the pivotal moments that have changed lives forever. This time we are joined by Chantal. How are you today?
I'm good. How are you?
Fantastic. I'm so excited that you agreed to do this because I really enjoyed talking to you about your story and your episode because I found, as a teacher myself, I think hearing your story and the impact that your teacher had on you in high school was just really inspiring and super cool. And I hope we can talk a little bit more about that. But just as a reminder to those of you listening, Chantal's story, there were a couple areas that we went into, but the one that made the most impact for me was you were kind of at a space in which you were ready to leave high school and you were done. There was bullies and it was just not a good experience for you. And a teacher happened to see you one day just feeling not so great. And you told that teacher kind of what your plans were. And they said, hold on, go home, write a couple poems. We're going to submit this for a scholarship. And then your whole life changed because you wrote those poems. You ended up getting a scholarship. You went to college, all these cool things that came from a teacher caring enough to be like, wait, hold on a second. Did I do a good recap of that?
Yeah, that's the gist of it. Exactly.
So on these bonus episodes, I like to just kind of talk about after the recording and if there were any things, any kind of reactions or feedback or anything like that as it relates to sharing your story, because so many people, I think there's a lot of people that are afraid to share their story, even if it's like super good or we want to like code it with something that sounds very performative or, everything was sunshine and rainbows. And so I'm wondering, once you kind of finish sharing your story with me, and I didn't know that story, did you feel any sort of way after we pressed stop on the recording?
I don't think it had too much of an impact on me to share the story. You always feel a little bit lighter when you take the time to kind of offload some of your stuff, whether it's good or bad, just to share it with somebody else and to say it out loud always feels good. So, and then there was obviously nerves knowing that this would go on social media where like people that I went to high school with were going to listen to it. And there's always the people who might not have great feedback or like, what if my bullies see the link and they listen to it? And, it's just like, so there's always a little bit of hesitancy, but at the same time, like I'm a grown adult and those bullies are nothing to me. So like I don't truly care, but you can't help that little bit of hesitancy in the first place. But it, you know, it always feels good when you take a moment to say the things that constantly bounce around in your head out loud.
Totally. I talked to a couple people recently and we were like, it's such a different experience when the words come out of your mouth than, you can, everything sounds really, sometimes things sound really big and major in your head. And then you say it out loud and you're like, oh, that's not, that's not so bad. Like we can get through this. These things are, we can get past whatever we're facing here. But when it was in our head, it was like, oh, no way. There's no, I can't do that. So I,
That is combating anxiety in a nutshell.
yeah, totally. So I get that feeling of like the little bit of apprehension, but you know what? Those bullies kind of served you well in a way because it kind of led you to these spots in which, your teacher saw that in you and saw what was happening. So screw them.
Absolutely.
What about when you listen to it? For me, when I listen to these episodes, I try to be really in the moment when we have these conversations. And so when I go back and listen, it's like a completely different experience for me because I'm like, I don't remember even talking about that. Did you have any of those feelings when you listened back to it?
Yeah, it's the same. It's the same for me where, you know, you're just in the moment having this conversation. And it's like my words aren't premeditated and I'm not, you know, reading from a script. And so you go back and you listen. And anytime I do any kind of a podcast setting where I have to go back and listen to the episode later, it's like, oh, I don't really remember that portion of that conversation happening, but yeah, okay. You know, and you just kind of, you get to listen to it from a different perspective of, you know, not having to that stream of consciousness happening. You're able to just sit and take it all in. And so it's always fun for me to go back and listen again, you know, actively instead of participate. You know what I mean? Does that make sense? So yeah, it's fun.
I like your story too because it's like your life now, that version of Chantal, like in high school, could not imagine what you're doing because of the
Absolutely not.
circumstances. And so listening back to it, you're almost like telling us, this story of someone else. So like you're on you're listening, you're eavesdropping to someone else's story, but it's yours. And you're like, oh, I didn't think I was going to tell it that way. And I know we talked about this. You were able to, or maybe you had already been connected a little bit, but you were able to reconnect a little bit. Your teacher actually heard the episode, right?
Yeah, I had a couple people reach out after the episode, but Mr. Blesky, the teacher, the headliner of my story, he, you know, we've been friends on Facebook since high school days. And we, you know, every now and then I'll pop in and send him a message or, you know, we'll comment on each other's things. And so there's always been like this little, you know, like most people communicate on social media, blips here and there. And, you know, he just listened and he, you know, was like, oh, it's just one of those things where I think it's something so prominent for me and something that takes up permanent headspace for me. But for him, like he doesn't think about that. Like that's not something that he remembers even happening, probably. And so I think that it probably took him a little bit by surprise because while I have thanked him in the past, you know, I have taken time over the years to be like, hey, you know, thank you again. Like, hey, this just happened all because of you, you know, stuff like that. I think hearing it through my voice and hearing my story play out instead of just the random words in a Facebook message, you know, probably had a little bit more impact for him. And so I'm glad that I was able to have this new medium of sharing that gratitude to him. And, you know, he lives down in Key West now. And so, you know, I know that I have a friend down there. And if my family and I ever head south, we will 100% meet up, have some lunch, like get together. And it's just nice to know that that connection is there because he's somebody that I definitely want to keep in my life in one way or another. And so I think that it was really nice for both of us to be able to have the story shared and reminded, you know, refreshed in his mind. And then, you know, I had classmates reach out to me. One classmate in particular, one of my, you know, high school friends, Jenny, she reached out and was just like, floored, you know, by what she heard. And she was just like, I'm so sorry. Like, I'm sorry that I didn't do more to help you or do more to protect you. And, I'm like, listen, we're 16, 17 years old. When you're that age, at least my generation, you didn't really live outside of yourself in your own bubble. Obviously, if you see somebody like crying in a corner or like bleeding on the floor, you'll go, oh, let me touch base with this person. But when there are people walking around you with like inner turmoil or struggles or battles, you don't, when you're a teen, you're not like paying attention for those small cues. You're not paying attention for that body language or those silent cries for help. So, like, I don't hold grudges against people, period, but I don't hold any ill will towards my friends. The friends that I had in high school, I'm not mad at them. Like, how dare you not help me or advocate for me or speak up for me? Like, because listen, we're kids. We all have our own set of things going on. We're not living beyond that. And that is never something that I would like hold against anyone. But it was still, she was just, she's like, I'm so sorry. And she asked me, she's like, we discussed some more details, and just having her reach out to say, like, it breaks my heart to hear this. I had no idea. Thank you for sharing it. It's nice to kind of feel heard, even if it is, gosh, what, 12, 14 years later. Yeah, hurts. Even though it's so many years, over a decade later, it's nice to have somebody be like, hey, I hear you, and that was really great to have a few of those classmates be like, thanks for sharing. We had no idea. Like, we're so sorry you went through that. And that was cool, to reconnect with them a little bit more and have that result from my episode as well.
What's nice about that, and I've created the show because I wanted listeners to feel heard or less alone, right? But what I'm finding, and it's been really great, is that so many of the guests are also saying something similar to what you're saying, is that like it's maybe not the act of recording it, but the act of this episode, someone hears it and then reaches out and creates this new connection. And like you said, and you feel heard, even though it's down the line, it's like some kind of extra healing for some people, through this journey of the Life Shift podcast. Not necessarily one particular part is, more impactful than another, but it's nice to hear this, but also know that listeners too probably heard your story, don't know you, right? But are like, oh, I don't feel this has happened to me, or I've been bullied too. I'm not the only one that, and I chose to do XYZ. Maybe it's not the exact same story, but they feel a little less alone in that experience. So
And that's very real, that situation that you're talking about, where like a listener will hear an episode and feel a connection with the person. And it I went on a podcast a few years ago, and a woman heard it, and she reached out to me through social media and was like, hey, I heard you on this XYZ podcast. You sound really cool, and I think we have a lot in common, and I would love to like meet you in person. And I was just like, oh my God, this is crazy. Okay. And I met up with her, and she's still my friend to this day. We still get together and talk and text and exchange gifts for no reason. And, like, all because this woman heard me on a podcast and was like, I like her. I want to be her friend, and took that leap and reached out to me. And like, now I have this lifelong friend, and our kids play together, and it's just this amazing thing. So I love that your show is giving that opportunity to others as well, because it happens. It's very real.
we're just humans having this experience, trying to do the same thing, right? We're just trying to live our lives and
Mm-hmm.
try to live our best lives, and sometimes we hide the things that other people can actually relate to because we want to be performative or we want to be seen a certain way. And so I'm so grateful that everyone that's agreed to be a guest has been so open and just like, here it is, and
Mm-hmm.
if this can help one person, we all win.
Yep.
Humanity wins in a sense, because if that one person is now feeling less alone, leading a better life, whatever it may be, I consider that a win. Did you hear from anyone that like just didn't know your backstory and like is a current friend of yours and they were like, I did not know. I can't imagine what your life would have been like had you not done that.
I'm a very open person, and so there are not very many people who, at least like the people who I interact with regularly who don't know, if not all of most of my story, because I'm a habitual oversharer, and I'm like, this is who I am, good, bad, and in between. And, so there aren't a lot of people who would have listened to that episode that I'm already close with who wouldn't have known at least the majority of the situation. So yeah, that wasn't necessarily experienced for me.
I've had a few people, and this is probably not true of your story, but I've had a few people who have shared their story and then they got some surprising feedback from people in which it was like not good or that's not how it happened or that's not how I saw it happen. Did you have any of those? It sounds like probably not.
Fortunately, no. Granted, the people that I think would have given feedback like that would have been the people who tormented me in school. And I don't associate with them or with people who associate with them. Like I've very thoroughly moved away from any circles where those types of people linger. So I don't think that the episode would have gone out to anyone who would hold that mindset.
Good.
But yeah, no, that's, there's always going to, especially if there's a situation where somebody feels they may be being attacked or maybe they're being thrown into a bad light in the sense, in a situation with me where I'm talking about bullies, it's like, even if I don't say them by name, if they know that they're the person I'm referring to, their defenses are going to go up, their hackles are going to raise. And of course, they're going to come back and be like, grumble, grumble. That's not what happened. How dare you? And it's like, well, this is a you problem, And so fortunately, no, that was not anything that I had to deal with.
Yours was a heartwarming story for me. So it was interesting for me. I shared my personal story on an episode, and what it led to was, lots of people reached out and they didn't, I'm an oversharer as well. So most people I knew know that story. But I got to have a really great conversation with my dad because, we lived the same experience, but in totally different ways because he was in his 30s, I was 8, and and the way he saw things. So it was really interesting to have a conversation about it and the unnecessary apologies that came from him saying, I didn't do that on purpose or like whatever it may have been, and it was like, well, no, like you said, it's just like that was 100 years ago and you did the best you could with what you knew, right? And so but it led to such a great conversation for me. So it was just so valuable, one, sharing my story, but then also having my dad hear it in that way instead of like a conversation to process it, and then we were able to have that conversation. So
That's
I was
awesome.
blessed in that sense, like that's a win for me if nothing else that we
Yeah,
got to have that
absolutely.
conversation. As a podcast listener, what are you typically drawn towards? Like what stories do you like to if you listen to nonfiction or interview shows like this one?
When I listen to any kind of nonfiction, like my big ones are Dax Shepard's Armchair Expert. I love that podcast. I can't even remember the name of it. There's a podcast with Will Arnett and Sean Hayes, and I can't remember the name, but my husband and I listen to that podcast. And I like podcasts that, similar to yours, give you kind of this insight into people and information and situations that you may not have been privy to before. That's really fun. Like things that are revealing and that are, but also like, I'm not even just like super heavy stuff, but just like lighthearted. It can still be revealing and it can still be like illuminating. And so those are like the interview style nonfictions that I enjoy. And then, of course, stuff like The Office Ladies and, my various entertainment where, again, you're getting these details and facts and figures that you didn't know before, but it's something that you love, and now you get to learn and have all of this new stuff and these new details be revealed to you. And so that's really fun for me as well. So there's kind of an underlying similarity to all the podcasts that I listen to, but for the most part I like more light, fun, but still like revealing and informative.
Well, life is tough enough sometimes, right? We want to
Yeah.
we want to go to lightness. And speaking of
Yes.
lightness and the armchair expert, is that what it's called?
Armchair Expert. Yeah.
Yeah. So on social media, I follow Kristen Bell. And when she did her 2022 wrap up, Armchair Expert was number 2 on her list.
Of
And
course.
she posted and she was like, ooh, bad wife.
Yeah, that's all right. Hey, we all gotta live our truth, right?
It was I love Kristen Bell, but I'll listen to anything she does.
Absolutely.
My last question is really just I like to talk to former guests that have come on, shared their story, done kind of the whole process. If there's someone that's maybe like they want to share their story, but they're a little hesitant, is there something that you could share with them about the value of sharing your story? I know you're an oversharer like me. So is there any advice that you could give someone that's just like, I don't want everyone to know, but I really do think I should share it?
There's multiple things and multiple reasons why I think being open and honest and sharing is important. The first, which I touched on, getting it out of your head and out of your mouth lightens your load a little bit. It really does. It doesn't take away the thoughts or the situations or the experience, but it puts it out there so that you're not just harboring it by yourself. There's a lot to be said for speaking things out loud. And even if you just speak them out loud alone in your room to start, you're speaking them out loud and that's helping. But then when it comes to, speaking your story to others, it doesn't matter who you are, what your situation is. Everyone can relate to everyone in some way. So while somebody may be giving a super heavy, traumatic story about like a very traumatic life that they've lived, everyone in some way will likely take something from that they relate to, whether it be a thought, a feeling, like or a physical experience. Like there is some nugget that your story will relate for other people, if that makes sense. Like, so knowing that by speaking your story and putting it out there, there's going to be people who in some, whether it's a minute way or a massive way, there are going to be people who relate and who hear you and who understand what you're saying or what you're feeling. And that, again, you're not alone. It gives you a little bit more community. It gives you that little bit of a boost of support and of love, even if it's from strangers. So, sharing and putting your stories out there and speaking what's on your mind can help you not feel like you're the only person dealing with it, or who they can guide you to other people who understand, or maybe who have felt similar ways but for different reasons. So, there's a lot of positives and good reasons to take that leap and do that scary thing and say the thing that you need to say. And even if you start at home by yourself, speaking out into the void of your room, that's how you start. And then you're saying it on a podcast with, hundreds or thousands or even more listeners. And then that there's going to be people out there who maybe they don't understand and they're just hearing you. But then there's going to be people out there who understand on some level what you're saying, and you have community.
It's interesting to that point. I've put out a lot of episodes now, and I'll hear from people that say, I listened to this episode and this particular part really moved me. And in my brain, like when I put out show notes and I put out titles and whatnot, there's a theme, right? There's something that like, this is the pivotal moment that we're really talking about. And these people come by and they're like, this part over here, this one, like way in the obscure background. And you're like, I can't believe that's the part, like of all the things. So you're right. You never know when what someone's going through at the moment that they're listening to, because like that can change something as well. So you're 100% right that your story, whoever's story, can affect pretty much everyone in some way. Because again, we're all humans trying to do the same damn thing.
Yeah. And it doesn't matter if it's your joys, if it's your trauma, if it's your feelings and emotions, everyone can relate on some level to something that you have to say. So why not share that and feel that?
And I think there's something to be said too of like maybe the people that are sharing these more traumatic stories, knowing that other people are listening, and in general, humans are rooting for each other to succeed, to come out. And if you're sharing a story and you're maybe still in something, maybe there's someone that's going to reach out and actually share their story to help you, right? And so it creates that community, like you said. So speaking of community, I just appreciate that you, one, trusted me to put your story on the Life Shift podcast, that you came back for this. I appreciate your friendship. I know we haven't seen each other in 400 or so years,
Yeah,
but I just appreciate you being a part of this.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Happy to be here.
Well, for those of you listening, we will have another bonus episode in a few weeks, and thank you to Chantal for sharing the reaction to sharing your story on this bonus episode.
Thank you.
For more information, please visit www.thelifeshiftpodcast.com.